All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking about migration today. Migration refers to simply the movement, the permanent movement of people to a new location. You might want to pause this and take a moment to bring up or print out or write down or something the vocabulary for this chapter so you have it with you. When I talk about a permanent move to another location, I'm really talking about something longer than a vacation, you know? Spending a summer somewhere doesn't necessarily mean migration, but it can under the right circumstances. If you're going there to work, if you're going there, whatever. If you're going to go to visit Aunt Edna, that's not migration. So migration is moving somewhere with the intent to live, even if for a short while. That's hence the term permanence. You live there. But overall, it refers to the movement of people. Now, before we get too deeply into this, I want you to understand the difference between two terms. There's immigration with an IM, and there's emigration with an EM. Immigration, and both of these have to do with your point of view. Immigration refers to the idea that someone is coming into a place. So, it's migration to a location. Emigration refers to somebody leaving from a place or migration from a location. So if you're standing in America and somebody else comes into your country, they are an immigrant. If you leave America, from America's point of view, you are an emigrant. And again, same thing. If you're leaving somewhere and going somewhere else, wherever you're going, you're an immigrant to them and an emigrant to your home country. So just so when you run across these terms, you're not terribly surprised. All right, again, if you have any questions about this or anything else during this presentation, go ahead and pause and toss it into the questions for Hess. Or if I happen to be available in the chat room at the time, I will attempt to be so you can pause and find me there. All right. So, why do people migrate? These are key questions that geographers who are looking at migration patterns ask, and these all lead to much deeper and more detailed questions. But why do people migrate? Why do they pick up and leave and go somewhere else for a permanent location, for a permanent living situation? It's an interesting question. So, another question is, where do they commonly migrate to? And that's an interesting question because we're not talking about, like, do they all go to America? I'm not talking about a specific place. Relative to where they are, where do migrants go? So, anyway. All right. And then the last question is, what impact do migrants have on the area they migrate to? This is a question we're not really going to answer in this chapter. We will to an extent, but really it's something we're going to look at culturally, developmentally, technologically, the whole nine yards. So, but these are key questions to keep in mind. We're going to focus mostly today on why people migrate, and we're going to start looking at where they migrate to. So, we're going to go ahead and I want you to pause the video and talk about this question in your group. Now, you're going to look silly if you don't do it, because everyone else is going to be like, well, why did I pause? So, why do you think people commonly migrate? What do you think are the most common reasons people migrate? What is, in other words, their primary motivation for picking up stakes and getting the heck out of town? Go ahead and take a moment to pause for that question. ... No, really, you need to pause the video if you didn't, because I'm just going to keep talking. I'm going to move on. All right. So, why people migrate can be broken down into two factors: push factors and pull factors. Now, as we go through this, I want you to take a look and consider at what the previous conversation you had of why people migrate and see if they match up at all. I think you're pretty intuitive about this, so I think you'll get it. Push factors and pull factors, okay? A push factor refers to anything that pushes someone else out of a country. They're typically negative. I'm leaving because of these things going on around me. It could be I'm leaving because I'm part of the wrong ethnic or cultural group. It could be I'm leaving because the economic situation or the political situation is bad. It could be I'm leaving to seek adventure and fortune, whatever. Pull factors are what pulls them into the country that they are going to. Why are you going to that country? I want to go over there. I want to go to Hawaii because the weather's beautiful. I want to go to this country because they have more jobs. I want to go to this country because I feel more comfortable culturally being with them. So we're going to look at the most common push and pull factors and talk about a few examples of that. So the primary reason for migration are economic push and pull factors. The primary reason. It always comes down to money, or if you're talking about population, sex. So there's that. Economic factors that are push factors are things, economic reasons people are leaving a country. Unemployment is, of course, a big one. There aren't job opportunities. There's not opportunities for people to advance where they are. It could be that the types of jobs that you want aren't available. It could be that the money that you're making, you have a job but you're not making enough money and you feel like you can make more money somewhere else. All of these are really good examples of push factors, why you would leave a country. Pull factors are the mirror image. We think that there's more work there. We think that there are more opportunities there for advancement. We feel like we're going to get paid more in these countries. In the 19th century, people actually expected that American streets were paved with gold, and all they had to do was pick up gold from the street and send it home to their families. But for the most part, how attractive a region is, what is pulling them, a lot of it has to do with what kind of economic factors there are. And a good example of this is, and I can never remember if it's North or South Dakota, but a good example of this are the Dakotas, where there's an oil and wheat boom, and they're making money hands over fist. Their unemployment rate is so low, they have to close businesses because there aren't enough workers. So they're seeing a huge boom in migration into their country. People migrating from within America, but nonetheless. Another reason that people are leaving for or going somewhere for economic reasons is so that they can support their family back home. You talked a little bit yesterday about the typical migrant, right? A lot of them are going searching for work so that they can take a part of their paycheck, cut down their standard of living where they are, take a part of their paycheck and send it home to support the family. These are called remittances, and for some countries, these are a huge deal. These remittances can represent billions and billions of dollars for countries, even America. And we'll take a look at a map here in a second. But the idea is that these remittances, when money that is sent home from a migrant to support family back in the home country, are an important reason why a lot of people seek higher pay and better jobs. But they can't bring their whole family with them. So here's global remittances. Whoops, kidding. Those are not global remittances. All right. These are the amount of money in remittances from migrants living outside of their country that are sent back to these countries. And if you look, no country is immune to this. America is orange, which means $1 to $5 billion a year in 2010 were sent back to the United States to support migrants in other parts of the world. China, $15 billion. Mexico, India, France, $15 billion. This is money flowing into these countries from somewhere else. Iran, in the middle of the map, has almost $5 billion. Egypt, $5 to $15 billion. Australia, Russia, most of Northern Europe, Italy, the boot, Spain, $5 to $15 billion US dollars coming back into their country. Now, what about here? What does that represent? Well, all of these tan countries, that's not a lot of money compared to the amount of money that country is making. Their GDP, gross domestic product, how much money their entire country makes in a given year. For most of Europe, most of Africa, most of South America, Australia, Asia, North America, it's less than 5% of the total GDP. So it's not like it's propping up the country. But if you look dead in the middle of the map at Sudan, that's 5 to 10%, or 1/20th to 1/10 of every single dollar, or every single whatever their currency is, comes from outside their country. Pakistan, off to the right, next to India, that is a huge amount. North of Pakistan, two countries I don't recognize because the map is bad. Some of the Istans, no doubt. 25% or more from outside the country. If you look, you would expect Mexico or South America to be higher, but that's not the case, with the exception of some Central American countries where it's 10 to 20%. So these remittances are a lot of money writ large, but they're not necessarily breaking the bank and making that country everything it could be. Without those remittances, they don't exist. But nonetheless, they're an important element. You're going to watch a movie on this when the presentation's done. So go ahead and pause here, and for realsies, pause. I want you to come up with a few economic push and pull factors that were not already discussed. So I'll give you guys a second to do that while I pause, or am paused. All right, cultural factors. Cultural factors, it's kind of a big umbrella term when we talk about culture. These can be political factors, these can be religious factors, these can be factors that have to relate to race or ethnic group, but these are factors that are Also, very important, these are the second most common reason people leave. Um, um, so, for example, political turmoil could be a push factor. Here we see um, the Egyptian protests. Oh, sorry, that might be Syria. Anyway, Middle Eastern protests making the country very unstable. People are going to leave to avoid that kind of turmoil. Another example might be not fitting in with the religion. If you moved, for example, to Egypt recently and you were a Christian and the Muslim Brotherhood had taken over there, then you might not feel comfortable religiously with the Muslim Brotherhood in charge, or being a Christian in Iran, for example. So, or even being a Muslim in the United States after 9/11, you didn't feel culturally comfortable being here, so you'd go ahead and leave. So war is another cultural factor that can push you out. Pull factors, again, very similar. Pull factors could be things like you're going towards people of a similar religion or political persuasion. This could be something like people that are liberals living in Texas. They don't like that Republicans control the state, so politically they feel like they want to be more comfortable, so they move to Vermont or California or Oregon. So those would be examples of pull factors. I want to go there because they are like me. They share my political, cultural, religious, ethnic values. If you're an ethnic group on a border between two ethnic groups and you want to be more comfortable, you'd move more towards your ethnic group. Some specific examples of cultural push and pull factors would be things like refugees. People who are refugees are people that are forced to migrate from their homes and can't return for fear that they'd be persecuted because of race, religion, nationality, or that they're going to die in a war. Syria is producing an enormous amount of refugees. People are leaving because they feel like if they stay, they could be harmed. They could be persecuted by whatever side happens to control their town. So they leave, but they don't go usually to another country and set up shop. They usually end up in refugee camps, which are very makeshift, and I'll show you some of these in a minute. Another example would be forced migration, the best example of forced, which is where somebody forcibly takes you and kicks you out somewhere. Ancient examples would be expelling the Jews from Egypt, or another forced migration might be the Holocaust, or slavery, which you can see a picture of there. That is the largest forced migration in the history of the world was Western African slavery, and those slaves being brought over to the United States to the tune of about, I want to say maybe several million people. So that's a good example. Here we have, we're going to take a pause. If you can, same as last time, come up with a few cultural push and pull factors that were not already discussed. Pause. Go ahead. No, but for realsies. You'll learn more. All right. So here's a refugee map. You can see some areas of the world that are producing a lot of refugees. The darker the color, the more refugees live in that country. So they were displaced from their home, but they didn't leave the country. The red arrows represent people that left the areas to go to other places. The thicker the red arrow, the more people that left. So you can see in the areas I've circled. Colombia, a lot of internal refugees from the FARC, FARC, they're communist, communist like militia, like a paramilitary organization. Also, drug wars. I mean, that's not even a big deal. This is an old map from 2005, copyrighted 2008, so we're not seeing places like Syria and Mexico, where we're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff from drug wars. Iraq, obviously. Afghanistan, people leaving Afghanistan, not a lot of internal migrants, refugees. Next to Iraq, to the left of Iraq, you can see a lot of arrows. That's actually Israel and a lot of the Palestinians that are being that are leaving because they feel like they're being oppressed by the Israelis. People leaving next to India, you can see people leaving, the name of that country, Myanmar, formerly called Burma. It's a dictatorship, so... Central Africa, you can see a lot of conflict, a lot of internal and external migration. One thing to note about these migrants, they don't go very far because whatever they have with them is what they own. It's not like they pack up a U-Haul and go. These migrants are picking up whatever they can put in their hands and leaving, so they're clearly not going very, very far at all. So whenever there's a conflict, the countries around that conflict often have a lot of refugees that they have to take care of. Here, for example, is a Syrian refugee camp outside of Syria. I want to say it's in Lebanon or Jordan. But we're talking hundreds of thousands of people living here. Now look at that and imagine what happens when it rains. Yeah, exactly. These are not great conditions these migrants, these refugees are living in. All right, last factor, the environmental factors. This is the least important factor causing people to leave. Push factors could be anything from not liking the weather, sort of like when I'm going to leave the Antelope Valley because I absolutely hate the weather here more than anything in the world. I hate the dirt. I hate the everything. It could be a natural disaster like the push factors that forced all the dinosaurs to go to the North Pole. That is a joke. There are no dinosaurs at the North Pole. Obviously, there's only Santa. So, a push factor could be, blizzards in the Midwest or nor'easters in the Northeast or hurricanes in the Gulf area or Mexico. They could be a number of unpleasant environmental factors, or it could just be you don't like them. Pull factors could be pleasant environments, places you're not going to get places you're not going to get the type of weather you don't like, places where the environment suits you more, maybe it rains more. Could be paradise like Hawaii. Hawaii is primarily people move there for the environmental factors, I gotta say that. Obviously, it's beautiful. So, other pull factors could be avoidance of environment. You're trying to avoid snow, trying to avoid other things. And so you go places that don't have it. Anything from heat to flooding to a number of other things could be the case. Natural disasters, though, are a big one. Natural disasters produce a lot of forced migration. Here we have the Lower Ninth Ward. This is Louisiana in 2004. And this was 2005. This was Hurricane Katrina. The levees that held back the water broke. The city of New Orleans is actually beneath sea level. So when the walls broke, all the water flooded in, and of course it flooded all the poor areas and most of the rest of the city. So here we have a first world nation underwater. Most people ended up at the Superdome, where I believe the Saints play. So that became a huge refugee camp in America, no less. So we're going to pause. I'd like you guys to come up with a few environmental push and pull factors that are not already been discussed. ... Pause. All right. So where do people move to? Well, a lot of this has to do with something called distance decay. Distance decay is the idea that the further, and this applies to more than just migration, but the further away a phenomenon gets, the less that phenomenon has a tendency to have an impact or have a draw or have a pull. For example, the further away a country is from you, the less likely you are to move there, the less attractive that it is. The specific definition is the diminishing in importance and eventual disappearance of a phenomenon with increasing distance from its origin. In this particular case, distance decay refers to the further away you are from somewhere, the less likely you are to migrate, which means that migrating within your own country is a lot more frequent than migrating outside of your country. You are more likely to migrate to another part of the U.S. than you are to migrate to another country. And you're more likely to migrate to a nearby country than you are to go to a country that's really far away. So, yeah, there you go. And one of the reasons for this is what are called intervening obstacles. That's a vocab term. Intervening obstacles. Intervening obstacles are anything that stand in your way for migrating. It's something that prevents you from migrating. And it doesn't just have to be like a mountain or a river. Intervening obstacles could be something like the cost of moving, or it could be something like an ocean and the added cost of getting over the ocean. An intervening obstacle could be immigration policies. There's a number of things. But the shorter distance you are to move, the less likely you are to face an intervening obstacle. So there's that. International migration looks a lot like this, and we're going to go more into detail about this later. But you can see, if you look at the United States, let's start there. North America, you have very little leaving North America, and if you live in North America, you're most likely to migrate to Australia, also Europe, but that's not on here. The thicker the arrow, obviously the more migrants head in that direction. So Asia, you have a tendency to go to the United States. Asia does not, however, have a tendency to go to South America. Why? Distance decay. It's further away. Europeans have a tendency to go to North America, but they don't have a tendency to go to Africa. Isn't Africa close? Yeah, but it's poorer. People don't often migrate down. They don't migrate to a lower level of development unless there's a really awesome job opportunity. An example of this would be people that go and work in places like Kazakhstan and Afghanistan and make crud tons of money to live there for a year and work on their profession because they don't have skilled labor there of their own. But for the most part, people migrate only to areas of equal or greater development. So as you can see, South America migrates to North America. Europe migrates to North America. Europe does not migrate to Africa. Africa goes to Europe. Why? Because they're just across the Mediterranean from each other. Africa, to a lesser extent, goes to... Africans do migrate to... Australia, but you don't see a lot of migration into Asia, which is interesting. Now, this map isn't very good because it doesn't take out like the Indian subcontinent or the Middle East as a separate entity. Central America and South America, for example, as separate entities. But nonetheless, the further away something is, the less likely you are to move there. And the less developed something is, the less likely you are to move there, unless it's a greater development than you already have. So here's what we call net migration. There's net in migration and net out migration. Net in migration, you can see these terms in the lower left. Net in migration refers to a country that has more people coming in than leaving. So if 100 people come in and 50 people leave, you have a net in migration. A net, and it's usually expressed as, again, like CBR and CDR per 1,000 population. So the number of migrants per 1,000 population, right? So if you look at Australia, Saudi Arabia, a little bit in West Africa, and North America, they have 3 migrants coming in for every 1,000 people in the population. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a lot of people when you consider we're talking on scales of millions. Then there are countries with net out migration. These are countries that have out migration of X number of people leaving. Let's say you have 100 people leaving and only 50 people coming in. You have a net out migration. Again, it's expressed as 3 people for every 1,000. So, or X number of people for every 1,000. So the dark purple you see in Central and West Africa, Central Asia, Mexico, that is a 3 people leaving for every 1,000 people in the population. That's obviously going to affect the size of the population, but people are leaving, and it says something interesting about what's going on in that country. So, the darker the red, the more people coming in. Or orange, I guess in this case. The darker the purple, the more people going out. What's interesting, if you look in the box I drew, almost all of the countries experiencing net in migration are in the northern hemisphere. Actually, above 30 degrees parallel, 30 degrees latitude. You can see that running through Mexico and North Africa and India. Underneath, most of the countries have net out migration. They are less developed countries, so people are leaving them to go to more developed countries. You're going to see that line, that 30th degree latitude, that's going to come up a lot. That is the line above which most countries are developing at an accelerated pace, and the countries below it are much less developed. And we'll talk more about that over the course of the course. There, that made sense. All right, here's your final pause. You have one more slide after this. Why do you think that countries have net in migration have it, but other countries don't and have net out migration? Why do you think that is? Pause and talk about that. No, really, pause. Did you do it this time? Disappointed in you. All right, there's a video in the below this presentation. Watch the video on remittances below this presentation on Moodle. Once you're done, discuss the role that remittances play in the migration of people around the world. What is the role that remittances play? Are they a push factor? Are they a pull factor? What's the correlation between remittances and migration? What are we seeing happening? So thanks for listening to the presentation. I hope that this actually worked. Bye-bye.